Well, zing that down just a skosh. Yeah, we're live. It is 6:53. I'm here early. So let's jump right in. We're going to talk about 3 different times when I started with superchargers, but ended up using turbos, and why life was so much easier for me making that step up or step sideways or step down or whatever it was. So we can take a look at that, and then we'll talk about some more information that I got on the AMR 500 blower today. So project number 1, I had 3 projects where we started out with superchargers, and one of them, the first one that we'll talk about, was a little Honda Civic. It was a 93, I think, hatch SI single cam VTEC, doing stuff with Oscar Jackson, and we put one of his superchargers on there, and it was an M45, and I was trying to get this thing to run. I wanted it to run 150 miles an hour, so I thought, hey, we're going to add lots of power. We're going to add boost, and this will be good. So we added the supercharger, and it obviously picked up power, and I went through step by step. This is for a series of magazine projects that I did for Sport Compact Car, and we did a bunch of testing because I had done a bunch of testing with this particular motor because somebody had asked me about different size and length air intakes, and on a VTEC Honda motor, it makes a big difference. It changes the power curve a lot. And it changes it because the same reason that we saw plenum volume changes, we saw a change in the Helmholtz resonance. So when we run a short, like we ran a little short RS Akimoto filter on a stick kind of thing, and it wants to make it provides, we ran everything on the chassis dyno, and we ran it initially with the hood open. And so that short length with either an open, we had the little radius air horn that had a filter on it, and we ran that, and then we ran an AEM one, which was a smaller diameter. The RS Akimoto one was 3-inch. The AEM one was 2.5, I believe, and was long and went all the way into the fender well, and it had an air filter in the fender well. And then we also tried the factory air box, and we showed the power differences of those, and those 3 had different power curves. Primarily, and not a flow thing, it was primarily a difference in the resonance tuning of the effective length. But the thing that happened when we did that test is I ran all of those tests out. We also ran them for top speed and measured the charge error, because when you're doing the test, and this was way back, and obviously we knew this going in, but when you're doing the test with an open with the hood open on the chassis dyno, an open filter in the engine compartment, hey, look, it did really well, made lots of power. And it did make more power over the stock factory airbox. Not surprising. It did do that. Problem is when you close the hood and now you're grabbing hot air, it doesn't make nearly as much power. And we saw that when we actually did the top speed test, because we measured these things for top speed in Mexico, our top secret test area, and measured them and measured the temperature. And the air temperature in the manifold was much, much hotter with that open filter in the engine compartment. So fast, and we did all it. And then with the AEM one, even though it made a little bit less peak power than the other one did, when we were running, the charge error was much lower and it went faster. And then the factory one actually went faster than the open filter one when we did it, because the charge error was lower because it was grabbing air from the fender well, even though it made less power than the other air intake did. Again, they sold a lot of those because people did a lot of testing with the hood's open. That's why I did that test. But I used a lot of that testing, and I decided, well, we want to go fast now because we want to go 150 miles an hour. So I put the Jax Racing Supercharger on there, and then put a bigger throttle body, which helped more air go in and more boost come out, and put a cold air on it, put a header, tried a bunch of different headers on it, did a bunch of stuff, and we were struggling to get to, and we try to build good cam, I think. And it didn't seem to help, which I was surprised, because I know that I don't know what the specs were on his cam, because he didn't give me that. It was just the good cam. Good cam. Is your cam any good? Yes, it is. It's quite good. But it didn't seem to do anything on the chassis dyno. But we were near the 200 horsepower at the tire range with this combination, and we were trying to get it. And then we put an ERL water injection on it because of charge temperatures. We were running like 13 pounds of boost, and we were trying to cool the charge air because it was very, very hot. During the runs, it would get up to 300 degrees, which is not good. So with the water injection on it, and we were running this. I was running this on pump gas too. With the water injection, it would bring the temperature down quite a bit, but we didn't quite get there. We didn't quite get to 150 miles an hour. Then after doing all that stuff with the supercharger, we put a single turbo on it. And then it was like, oh, look, 250 horsepower at the tires, really, really easy, and with less boost. It had an intercooler and had all the things that we wanted. So it worked out a lot better. It made a lot better power. And then we found a similar thing with I did a similar project with a Ford Focus. I had I don't know, early 2000s, I guess, Ford Focus. It was a ZX3, the hatchback. And so it was underpowered, but we did the same thing. I put a supercharger on it because my goal for that particular project for Muscle Mustangs and Fast Forwards was to get it to equal the acceleration time or performance of a then 4.6 liter V8 Mustang GT, which was like a 13-second car. That was our goal. We wanted to run 13s with this thing. Well, we put a Jackson Racing supercharger on it, and then I talked Oscar into, hey, an M45 is not going to get this done. We already know that from the Honda thing. Let's put an M62 on here at least, because this is going to get us where we need to be. We need to be making what a Mustang makes at the tire. I said, we need to be like, 230 or 240 or 250 at the tire. This thing needs to make power. I said, because it's front wheel drive, it's not going to hook up anyway, not like a V8 Mustang is going to, and it's not going to make the torque because it's only a 4-cylinder. So we need lots of power. And so we went through the same kinds of things. We put the supercharger on, put the bigger supercharger on, put the 65 millimeter throttle body on it, put different headers on it. We even put ported heads or a ported head from the guys at Focus Central, and put some small cams in it. And then we were able to get this thing to run, I think it was a 1370 or 1380. So we were able to get it to do that with that combination, but we had to try a bunch of stuff. But after we took that off and I was driving around NA, I'm like, now it's no fun. It was a lot better when we had boost to it. And so then I started doing turbo testing. Then we put an F Max turbo kit on it. And it was just so much easier. You're making with 2/3 of the boost, you're making that much power, and then getting it to make the power that it made with the blower and all that stuff with a turbo on there. We ended up making 300 at the tire with the turbo, and we ended up making 520 or 30 with a bigger turbo and a Pectel standalone management system, and a different and all of those modifications. We just turned the boost up, put a 66 millimeter turbo on it, and kind of went for it with ice water and everything, and that all worked out good. But it was just so much easier to make the power with the turbo than it was with the blower, although in that case we succeeded in doing what we were doing. And then the last thing I did where we would eventually change the supercharger for a turbo is actually my land speed car, the Bonneville Civic. This whole thing started out with a Vortex supercharger, and the Vortex supercharger had enough power. I mean, it certainly had enough flow rate because it was designed to feed these other V8s. It certainly had enough flow rate to make the power that we needed to make. There were two problems associated with this. One, the people from Progress that I was originally doing this with one of them was a super knucklehead. But the other thing was that the way that the boost is supplied with a centrifugal blower is a rising curve. So even when you're in VTEC, going from 5,500 RPM to 8,500 RPM, that's a big change in boost between those two. So you would have to really, really rev this motor out to get it to satisfy the jump that happens in the standard transmission between fourth and fifth gear. It was much easier, and as it turned out, the way that this car eventually went fast and became the world's fastest Honda Civic was to put a turbo on there, put a 72 millimeter turbo on there with an air-to-water intercooler and all that, and ice water, and then run it. And even with the same configuration motor, cams and a ported head, and it was near 2 liters because that was the displacement limit. But running it with a turbo allowed us to have the same amount of boost at 5,500 as we had at 8,500. So all the boost was all in. There was no waiting for it to rise up. So we had a lot more power at 5,500 and 6,000, 6,500, 7 all the way out to the power peak, which was 8,000 or 8,500, we had more power. And so then it would accelerate much better once you, because in the first 4 gears, you couldn't put the power down anyway until the very top of fourth gear. That's the only time you could, once you were going 150 or 60 miles an hour, you could go to full throttle. Before that, you would just spin the tires because it had an open diff, and it had a bicycle tire that was about this wide on it. So it wouldn't put power down. So after you could get the thing loaded up in fifth gear and making power, that's when you really started motoring. And then having the extra boost, which in this case was, 14, 15 pounds, we could have 15 pounds all the way across. And so you just had a lot more average power production. And so for Bonneville, climbing in that last gear from that lower engine speed to the higher engine speed where you would be going really fast, it was so much easier with the turbo than it was with that particular supercharger. The supercharger would have done it, it just would have taken a longer run up to do it. And we could have gone maybe close to the same speed, but we were making a lot more power, obviously, at every given boost level because we weren't driving the supercharger. The other issue that we had with the Vortec and the Honda is Vortec originally had a transfer shaft on their blower kits for the Hondas. In fact, that's the thumbnail that I have up it's when we were doing the testing in the Del Sol, and it has a transfer shaft with like a spline transfer shaft. That's probably not strong enough to do what we were doing. And the way that we had to drive it was the pulley arrangement and stuff. What we ended up doing on the supercharger was we made a new mount for a Vortec down at my buddy Bernie, fabricated this thing up, made a mount for the supercharger down using the AC mount. And then we made a cog drive and then made a cog pulley fit on the factory Honda damper. But even after doing that, so we eliminated slippage as a problem. But what would happen is we would shear the keys off of the crankshaft. I never tried doing like a 300M key or something, but what it needed was 2 of them. And I didn't at the time think about just drilling it out and pinning it on the other side, which we should have done. It needed dual keys at least to make that work. And it was kind of a cool setup, but certainly would have made, had the potential to make lots of power. Just doesn't make the average power production like a turbo does. And that was the nice thing on all of these is that, a turbo is kind of free horsepower relative to a blower because it's not driving the blower. So it has that amount extra. And as we saw in the testing, even with a little AMR 500, it does take power to spin that blower, no matter what it is, no matter what you're doing. It takes power to spin a water pump, takes power to spin a power steering pump, even an alternator. All of those things take power, whereas the turbo, guys are going to argue about that, takes much less to drive. And so you don't have that parasitic loss and you're making more power per pound of boost and all that. So the turbo thing is definitely a good way to go. At least it was in these examples. And the thing was, they were a lot of fun to drive, especially after you put the turbos on them. But honestly, I had a lot of fun with the blowers on all of them. Because it's, relative to the NA power output, having boost on it, any kind of boost on it, was just way, way better. Because all of those, it can be argued that all of those were underpowered, and so having boost on them just made kind of all the difference in the world. So let's see. Have you ever used a blower? Okay, so the poll for tonight: have you ever replaced a blower or with a turbo? Have you ever taken a blower off and put a turbo on in place of that, like we were talking about tonight? Procharger is the same design as a Vortec, so it's a centrifugal supercharger. If you guys, I think I told you on one of the other live feeds, the little AMR 500 blower that was sent to Sweden. All of the, not all of, but for guys that don't know, a lot of the manufacturers, when they build superchargers, what they do is when you build a supercharger, the efficiency of the blower is a function of the clearance between the spinning rotors and the housing. So you want that to be a tight clearance. On a lot of the older designs, they would put little fences. What the heck are they called? Strips. They would strip them. And so they put little strips, little wear strips, basically. They would actually touch the surface of the inside surface of the housing so that they would seal. Because otherwise, when the thing is spinning and trying to move air from one side of the blower to the other, what happens is you build up pressure on the other side. And if there's a gap in between the rotor and the housing, air will bleed back through it. And that makes the blower less efficient. So the tighter you can get that clearance, the better it is at moving air. It grabs all the air, it seals it, moves it from one side to the other, and you get lots of air over on this side and lots of boost and lots of power. The problem with that is what happens when we're raising the boost. We also raise the temperature. So you have growth. So what happens is if you don't have enough clearance for that, just like this is just like ring gap, if you don't have enough temperature for the change in growth between the rotor and the housing, and the housing can also distort. What happens is the rotor can touch the housing, and if the rotor touches the housing, it scuffs the rotor and damages it, and then then bad things happen. Well, what they do is they put a coating on the rotors. So they put the spray coating on the rotors, and then that takes up some of the clearance, and then the coating can wear in if it gets too hot. The problem is that if it gets too hot, all of this coating comes off. And when the guys are doing the testing on the blower dyno, they've seen this quite often. This happened to the little AMR 500 when they were testing, because they're running the blower, at 5,000 RPM, 10,000 RPM, 15,000 RPM at different boost levels. They can adjust all that. They're running that, for a sustained period of time, let's say 30 seconds or a minute, so that everything stabilizes. They have all the temperatures, they have the power consumption numbers, they have all the things that they need. And so running the thing for that long can cause problems. And you get to some sort of critical temperature with these things where the blower says, look, I don't have enough clearance. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off all this coating, and then I'm going to start rubbing, and that's the problem. So you have this, this balance. Do we have enough clearance? Do we have very minimal clearance so the thing is real efficient? Or do we have enough clearance for when guys really want to turn this up to where they don't damage themselves? And this is a problem with these factory blowers that are designed to do what a factory blower is designed to do under its conditions. And when guys are going well and, beyond that, which guys do all the time, let's spin these things to 1,000,000 RPM, then it can create problems. And that's what happened to this little AMR 500. I don't know if that's indicative of the fact that this was a copy from China that doesn't have the machining or the clearance or the bearing tolerances or the other things that it would need to do. I don't know if the actual ones that they made in Japan would be better than the ones that they made in China. And because I don't know which one this one was, I didn't see it. The guys just bought it from when they were in Sweden. But that's what happened. But they did do a lot of testing at the lower RPMs and lower boost levels and stuff. And so we have a bunch of data on temperature and stuff. And so far, all the data seems to correlate pretty well with what I got when I did the testing using the LS motor to drive this blower. And the temperatures are kind of spot on. I think that this thing was over, and also the airflow numbers that we got were very comparable. So we are looking at 240 or 50 CFM, I think, is what the numbers that they got. Let's see here, MR data. And they also showed me some work that they have on a smaller twin screw blower, which is kind of cool too. So yeah, we're seeing the temperatures at 5 PSI, 165 to 70 degrees, starting out at around 150 at different CFM, at different flow rates, which are, I'm sure, correlated with engine speed or blower speed. And then at 10 PSI, the temperature was up over 200 degrees. It looks like 200. I'm thinking that's 222 or so degrees at 10 PSI. Obviously, none of these are intercooled either. So lots of good data. But I like the fact that it's all of the stuff that I set up when I was doing the LS, at least I got some decent information from that. So I did, it wasn't all a big waste of time. Craig, I've had superchargers over the years and I want to learn turbos. How do I learn them? Start with the basics. The very basics are, you need, just like with a supercharger, you need to pick the turbo. You need to size the turbo to meet your power needs. And then you start looking at other things. Then we start looking at, okay, what is the response rate? What kind of response rate can I get from my desired combination of, I want to make this much power, but with this motor and this turbo. Start there, and then there's more stuff you can learn after that. Just jump in. It's easy. Only the power doesn't come off the crank. So waiting for someone to start a car stream like this. Well, if you're new, they, first of all, welcome. If you have any questions, please throw them out there. By adding turbo to anything, you have to do hands-on learning. Yep. Just need a wastegate big enough to control the boost. That's very important. Otherwise, you have all the boosts all the time. Yep, lots of LS people here, but this channel is basically engine dyno testing for every engine family. So Ford, Chevy, Dodge, import, domestic, all the stuff. That's all I do is testing. So any difference between a blower cam and a turbo cam? People offer both of those, but an NA cam will work on both of those, and the turbo cam will work on a blower, and a blower cam will work on a turbo. A lot of people are getting better results with NA cam and supercharger builds. I guess that's a new thing. It's not a new thing. Richard has been saying that since the 80s. Because boost is just a multiplier. So whatever the thing does NA, whatever it does with the camshaft, when you run it NA, it's going to do that with boost. So if you have a camshaft, like most positive displacement blower cams tend to be really soft down low. They tend to be wide LSA deals, and they have been for years. I remember having this discussion with Magnuson. Oh yeah, you need to have a specialized cam to run these blowers. I'm like, and this is way back, and I remember thinking, I can't say that this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, that this isn't right, because who am I to say that? And as it turned out, I am the right guy to say that, because it was true. Not that I was selling cams or trying to promote anything, or I certainly didn't want to tell Jerry Magnuson that he didn't know what he was talking about. But I had tested lots and lots of them. This started way back when I did the little 274 cam on the Ford, and I ran it with just to see if it would work or how well it worked. I ran it NA, I ran it with nitrous, I ran it with a centrifugal blower, I ran it with a twin screw blower, and I ran it with a single turbo. And even ran it with another Roots blower, the little like 174, not a B&M, but it was a Holley or a Wyand carbureted deal. And guess what? It works on all those. If it's a good cam NA, it's going to be a good cam under boost. Could you make a turbo consistent for bracket racing? I think guys are doing that. It just takes getting for some guys, it's a two-step. Some guys, it's a converter. And then getting it to be, some guys, because the other guys want to burn the turbo guys down when you're loading it at the line. Wisconsin's in the house. Unless the car came with a blower, then I would go turbos. Little pizza cutters. It was. They're tiny. They're front runners, is what we use for Bonneville. I use top fuel tires on mine, not the back ones, because my car wouldn't spin those, but the front ones. Wanted to do twin turbos on my wife's GTCS. Oh, California Special, nice. She's not interested. Seems to me that running turbos is cheaper than running blowers. Am I right? Again, it depends on how elaborate you get. You can certainly buy a turbo much cheaper than you can buy a supercharger. Although you can buy this little AMR 500 for $150, but it's too small for any kind of V8 though. Didn't some of the Honda engines run backwards? Yes, the B and D series both did. In fact, when we were running those on the engine dyno, the only way that I was able to do that is we had to build an adapter, but was because the original 901 didn't have a curved vane impeller. It had a straight vane impeller and would spin both directions. Just driving the wife's Yukon tonight. She's thinking, how much better 6.2 would be with turbos. Nice. I've ever tried a Procharger on a Honda. Not a Procharger, but a Vortec is the same thing. I know the Procharger guys and the Vortec guys both would be angry with that statement, but they're both centrifugal superchargers and they both work the same way. So we ran a Vortec on it a lot, many times. That's in the books that I've written on Honda stuff, that there's testing on that. So it's the same kind of thing. Auto Guild has many specification videos and they give you a shout out as the GOAT. What is Auto Guild? I'll have to check that out. And thank you for the Auto Guild, guys. Thank you very much. How do you feel about LS7 lifters? Most people put those in when they're putting together a new LS combination. I'm not sure that's right. It just has an alternator line. So you just put an old alternator with the bearings about to go out so it has the cool sound. Richard, did you ever do a 2.3 liter Ford build? I haven't. I've done lots of testing on 2.3 liter Fords, but all in the chassis dyno way back with Dave from Tiny Avenger. Shiny Avenger. Colorado cams, if that's the 5-cylinder, I think you have to make you have to do regrinds, but there are a few people out there that will do those. My friend swapped a GT35 on a Park Avenue Ultra. We tuned it with HB tuners. It was a riot. Ford T65 did not like it, and that's a good point, James. When we talk about this on this channel a lot, that making the power actually is fairly easy. And we know that was that a GT35 on a 3800? What year was it? Was it a Series 2 one? Those motors you can make a lot of power with, the factory supercharged ones. But in the Grand Prix GTP and the Buick Regal and the Park Avenue, those are hampered by that lack of transmission. Same way we are with my truck. A 4L60E is, I'd love to put boost on it, but the transmission's like, yeah, it's probably not going to happen. Any tips for running a stock bottom end Gen 2 LT1 with a turbo and a mild cam? That motor works just fine. I would put ring gap in it. And then I don't know about your OptiSpark. Do you have the OptiSpark in it still, or have you changed that over? I don't know what intake that you have and all that. Funny, I was told my Chopper Copper camera wouldn't work for a turbo, not only by Texas speed representatives over the phone, but by all the Facebook pros. They obviously haven't watched the channel, have they? We already ran boost with a Truck Norris cam, so we know that it will work. We know any camshaft will work with a turbo. In fact, that camshaft is really good. It's kind of the one that I would recommend for a lot of LS stuff. Certainly for a 4.8, or maybe not a 4.8, but certainly a 5.3, because it's responsive. It does good things as a cam for an NA one, and that's exactly what you want in a turbo combination. So I hope you told them, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Or did you say that, did they say this? It's the wrong cam? Did you tell them that every cam is a turbo cam? Nicholas, not the ideal cam for high horsepower application, but enough for what I need. Yeah, but it's enough that you certainly could make 1,500 horsepower with that camshaft with turbos on it, or a single big enough turbo without any problem at all. A hot mess. How do you respond to what? What was my? I don't even remember. I'm scrolling back to see what your comment was, so I can try to remember. Try to remember my comment. At what PSI should the wastegate close? On what? Like turbos, because it takes lost energy instead of using crank horsepower. And a Vortex T-trim on a 351, switch to an S475. Love the turbo, more boost at lower RPM. That's the thing, is that you have a rising boost curve with a centrifugal, but when the turbo comes up, it's just all of that middle part. There's just lots and more. So if you guys want to see exactly how that works, just take a look at the video where I did twin turbos. They're small turbos, so there were two of them, and a centrifugal and a roots blower and a twin screw blower, all in the modular Ford, and it shows the power curves for all of them, and you can see what's happening and why there are different ones and what they do. Lifted ahead on the way to the track today, 18 degrees, and my 5.3 LS didn't like it at 23 PSI on E85. That seems like it should be safe there, right? Unless it was 18 degrees at 3,000 RPM, then maybe not. Honestly, on the engine dyno, we would have that much in it. Would a 6-liter LS be better against a Coyote? Well, you're going to see, because in 2011, and this is the video that I did today, that I'm finishing editing. In 2011, it wasn't a 6-liter against a Coyote, because it was never a 6-liter against a Coyote, because the Coyote came out after Chevy had introduced the 6.2, the LS3. So really, the marketplace competitors was a Coyote against an LS3, and you'll see that's a different story on an LS3 versus when I did the test versus the 5.3 liter. It's, the LS guys will be happy. I've been following along with Malcolm Bendel's Thunderstorm Plasmoid Generator Engine Tech. I haven't. I guess I need to. Friend asked me yesterday if I could make his 2.4 liter Saturn make 500 horsepower. I said, yes, it's possible, but it's an automatic transmission. Yeah, that's going to be a tough. Series 2, 2002, use a Series 3 aluminum upper intake. FL vane in the trans would have been replaced. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Motorsports, did you have aftermarket head bolts or studs? With a stage 4 F35 cam, what should I upgrade in the heads, all valve train, or would it be okay with just, what is the stage 4 F35 cam? I was on here last night, mentioned the Torque Storm build on the LS. I have videos up where we ran Torque Storms on LSs, and a Torque Storm is a centrifugal just like a Vortec or a Torque or a Procharger. The thing with the centrifugals, just like with any blower, you need to look at what the size of the blower is and what it's capable of feeding, because there are different superchargers that will feed different power levels. Send it. Okay, if it's a stock LT1, I would look at ring gap. I would probably, and since you're going to take it apart and put ring gap in it, because it probably needs to have more ring gap than it has, but it's plenty strong. The head flows good. Put a mild camshaft in it, put ring gap in it, and then boost it, and it will be fine, especially if you're doing an 0411 swap in it. So you have the coil unplug stuff, or coil near plug, or coil packs. I unfortunately have never supercharged or turbocharged anything yet. Well, see, there's time. Never had anything more than 250 horsepower. But you have a 408 buildup, so you should step up quite a bit from that. 2.3 has a lot of following, but very little scientific evidence of what mods I feel. Well, we know that turbos, bigger turbos work. We know that intercoolers work. We know that 2.3 has a lot of development, because he did a lot of development for the use in dirt track stuff. Esslinger did a bunch of stuff with it, and obviously Roush and those other guys did stuff with when they were road racing it. But it can make good power. Richard, I meant to your poll. Remember, my Ecotech is compound boost. See, well, that's okay. You added it to it. That still counts. Basically, at 16 degrees at 4 to 5,000 at 15 psi on E85, that should be fine. Yep, Nicholas, it isn't a turbo cam, right? And you're right. Your thought is that the chopper copper cam has low end and that it would spool the turbo. It does. That's exactly what happens. Do you want me to send you the dyno results so you can show the people, hey, look, this works as a turbo cam? Red Storm. Well, Red Storm, what do you have the wastegate set at? A turbo on a GM 3800, how much boost do you want to run? The wastegate is going to determine how much boost you run. Wastegates are controlled by spring pressure, and then you have a pressure reference going to the bottom side of it to open the wastegate up. So your spring pressure, and then if you bleed some of that pressure, you can change that amount. So how much boost do you want to run on it is the question. May not be a stage 4, maybe a stage 3. Richard sent you my timing map on the engine. I think it lifted at. Haven't confirmed yet, but checking plugs this weekend. I don't mind to check it. I can see if there's anything weird, as long as I know. I mean, is it a Holly, or if it's a factory one, I might not know what I'm looking at because I've never looked at a factory timing map. All right, DMC. Gonna run down to Houston tomorrow morning. Texas Speed F or stage 4 F35 cam. Yeah, I don't know what that is, so I don't know what size it is. I don't have any feel for what the specs are on that. Send it. You don't really need to do a 4-bolt block. I don't know how much boost you want to run or how much power you want to make, but a 2-bolt will work fine with boost. LS 235, 248. What are you running that in? That's not in a 5.3, right? And are you running boost on that now? I forget now that there's 300 comments that I've answered. That's a really big camshaft. I didn't like turbos in the past because of the lag factor, but it seems that the tech has overcome that issue. The only issue now between both power adders seems to be the heat of the intake charge. A turbo at any given boost level, the charge temperature will be lower than any of the superchargers. So, I remember having this discussion with some people that sold superchargers and like, yeah, but all that hot air from the exhaust bleeds over into the inlet side. I said, have you ever measured the charge temperature? I said, not speculated about the hot going over there. I said, have you ever measured it? Well, no. I said, well, then why are we having this discussion? One of us has measured it, and I know the charge temperature is. I know what it is coming out of the supercharger. I know what it is coming out of the turbo, and it's less coming out of the turbo. The Alchemy Science YouTube channel is sharing all the testing of the Thunderstorm generator. Randall Carlson has been talking about a lot. It's mind-blowing. I'll have to check it out. Thanks, Dean. Have you ever noticed if factory increases the ring gap on boosted engines versus NA? I don't know. I don't know if they do. And they may not, because they have absolute control of everything, whereas most people don't, and including the amount of boost that they would run. And a lot of times for how long they'll allow you to run that. Why is Coyote so good at making low-end torque for being only 5 liters? It has several things that help low speed power. One of them is compression. The other one's a long runner intake manifold, and then variable cam timing. All of those help with that. But if you listen to Admiral, it's all in the cam. Those other things do nothing. They really do. What's our poll doing? 71% are saying no. Have you ever replaced the blower with the turbo? No. I have a friend with a 5.7 liter LS1. So, okay. BTR stage 2, red hot cam, ported 853 heads, factory LS1 intake, 102 millimeter throttle body. How did you put a 102 millimeter throttle body on an LS1 intake? Did you put some sort of adapter on it? And there's no way for me to know what kind of power it will make because I have no idea how well the heads were ported. Richard, how much boost should I run on a cast piston LSJ? I would actually come ask you. You've done way more testing on that than I have. I don't know. If you're running 30 pounds, that already seems like a lot. Did you put ring gap in it? And are you using good fuel and stuff in it? Gauge is maxed out at 30 pounds and I only have a 1.5 bar map. Don't you need more than that? Porsche increases the ring gap on 930s compared to 911s. They also set the valve spring height lower to add seat pressure. Do they use the same springs then, Dan? Is there a ratio that can be applied to ring growth versus bore size to calculate the necessary minimum ring gap to heat ratio? Yes, you want to run 6.5 thousandths per inch of bore. Have you put 8452 heads on an L92? I'm not even familiar with an 8452 head on an L90. I'm familiar with L92s, but I don't even know that casting number. So probably the answer would be no. Have you tried Turbo Smart's blow-off valve or wastegates? Seems like they're a popular choice. Yeah, the Turbo Smart stuff is really good. I've been using it for years and years and years, and it works really good. All of their stuff has worked just fantastic. Does nitrous make way more torque than horsepower? It just depends on where you engage it. It's just going to be a function of RPM, because if you add 100 shot and it adds 100 shot at 3,000 RPM, it's going to add a lot more torque than horsepower. But past 5252, 100 shot is going to add more horsepower than torque. Aircraft had time limits on full power before water injection, but no limits after it was introduced. The water injection helped with piston ring temperatures and stopped heat-induced detonation. That's critical. VCT and Emmerich work together to make a lot of that. Without the VCT, they wouldn't be able to run quite as much compression. Flat top pistons in my 6-liter S480, no intercooler, blew the head gasket at 4 pounds. Does that cause the intake heat, or should I look for other issues? An S480 at 4 pounds shouldn't blow a head gasket. That's a tune problem. Even without an intercooler, that's definitely a tune problem. I ran on my Mustang. We ran 7-8 pounds on a Vortec with no intercooler for 85,000 miles. So 4 pounds is really easy. 8452 are LS7 heads. So why don't some people just say LS7 heads then? Will an LS7 head go on that bore size? You have an L76. Okay, that's better than, that's still a big cam, but that's better than it being a 5.3. Apparently, the 2024 Toyota Tacoma will come exclusive with the turbo 4-cylinder and independent rear suspension. Can't confirm that it has a throttle body that big. Because the factory opening in an LS1 intake manifold is 78 millimeters. So you have to have a giant, like, adapter to go from 78 millimeters out to 102. And also it would be not beneficial at all. Just put the regular throttle body on there, because that's the size opening that you have in the intake manifold. I don't even know if you have to pull timing for 4 pounds. We would pull timing just in case you're running 4 pounds for a really long time. But most people, 4 pounds, are transitioning through 4 pounds. And so you don't have a lot of timing retard there. LS. So let's start over again so I remember what you're doing. how much power are you trying to make and what are you doing with it? And then we can decide on whether that camshaft that camshaft might not fit if you have, it might not fit available piston to valve clearance. What kind of gasket? How is it machined on the head gasket? I read that in a turbo engine, the exhaust back pressure, I'm sure that there's more. What happened, Oliver? I'm just looking for excellent flow with a torque storm. I'm doing the DOD delete, so I'm going to throw a cam in there. So just tell me how much kind of power you want to make, because I wouldn't put that cam in it. That's not going to drive that well. What's the benefit of a Procharger over a turbo? The only possible benefit that we talked about is on some really, really big applications, like they have Prochargers that make 2,000 or 3,000 horsepower. On some of the, having a rising boost curve can help with traction on some, for no prep guys and stuff. Otherwise, I don't think that there is, because guys talk about immediate boost response, but if you nailed the throttle at 2,000 RPM in a centrifugal supercharged car, you might have 2 pounds of boost. And even if you had none in a turbo, 2 pounds would be a little bit better, but not a lot. But as soon as depending on how you size the turbo, but as soon as the turbo comes on, it's going to just, it will be better. So you want to make 1,000 horsepower. So you don't need that big of a camshaft to make 1,000 horsepower with a turbo. And oh wait, I take that back. That's a Procharger or a torque storm. You're not going to make 1,000 horsepower with a torque storm. The torque storm's too small for that. You need a different blower or turbo to make 1,000 horsepower. Building an R53 Mini. It's got a 17% reduction on the blower and 2% over on the crank. It's got a larger intercooler. It'll be done for hill climb racing exterior, and then on to the LS1 TJ swap. Richard, running an E85 stock bottom end, LSJ, no need to increase ring gap. Gap was already set at the factory. Oh, so it was 30 already? Since all LSJs are boosted at percent checked out. One with a spun bearing. Okay, cool. I'm surprised that the factory would have, even on turbo and supercharged stuff, that they would have that much ring gap, only because they're ultra concerned about one, fuel mileage, but primarily emissions. And I don't think that, I think that having extra ring gap would kind of hurt them on emissions. Get an LSA. An LSA is also not going to make 1,000 horsepower. Or I should say it's very difficult because it's a smaller blower to do that. Oliver, I read that the exhaust pressure is always higher than the intake pressure. That's all. I have no questions. That's not the case. Usually it is. Usually on a turbo application, you have more back pressure than boost pressure. But like on my Bonneville car, we had less back pressure than boost pressure because we sized the turbo to make that happen. And we weren't terribly concerned with boost response on a Bonneville car because we couldn't put the power down anyways. So all we cared about was the turbo was efficient in that RPM range that I was talking about, where we were trying to run it. So at 15 pounds, we only had, I don't know, 9.5 pounds of back pressure. But most applications, particularly factory turbo applications, the boost pressure will be at least equal to or back pressure would be at least equal to, but usually more than the boost pressure. It could be 2 to 1. Sometimes when guys turn them up, it could even be 3 to 1, which is not ideal. The rear end and transmission are not going to live long at 1,000 horsepower. Yeah, that's the other thing to think about. LS Momo 55. Building the power, pretty easy. Building all the other stuff to handle that much power, it gets expensive. 1,000 wheel horsepower with the LSA is going to take a really serious ported blower, probably. Some of those turbo setups from the 70s had 3 times the back pressure of the boost. Yeah, it's a lot. Because they were only dealing with turbos that were available. The availability of, everybody this hasn't been forever. It hasn't been forever that you could get $150 or $200 turbo, and not just one, but endless ones. There's all sorts of stuff to choose from. That wasn't always the case. Speaking of reasonable pushrod V8s, what if you took the small block Chevy design and made a set of heads that use a gear shaft linkage behind the intake? I don't know what you're talking about there. You're just doing crazy talk now. Crazy. So that should have been the poll for tonight. Maybe we have a second poll for the last 10 minutes. So we'll end that poll. Give me a double poll on poll action. Okay, who thinks the stock and modified LS3 makes more power than the stock and modified Coyote? Because I tested all of those combinations. And go. That drives me nuts. Richard, I don't think they're initially worried about emissions versus survivability. My 04 Beta Redline has so much blow by it, can't keep the dipstick in it. That's not good. Don't forget that getting the compressor maps from the turbo manufacturers wasn't anywhere as quick and easy as it is now. I know those were few and far between. I mean, there wasn't a lot of turbos. You had Ray J's, Schweitzers. How's it? The weather's cooling off today. 1,000 horsepower probably isn't the 6L ADE built. Probably going to have to do a turbo 400. It'll be a race car, not a daily driver. Not worried about a daily driver. So what would somebody have to do to a turbo 400 for 1,000 horsepower? I mean, is it everything? Do you have to change everything inside of it? Richard, you had to go there, didn't you? Ford versus General. Yep. The 04 has. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Stop clicking on things. Stuff's in my way. $300,000 miles on, so ring gap is an issue. I don't know what that is, but on an LS, the 300,000 miles isn't going to change the ring gap very much on an LS. At least that's been my experience. Don't have to do much for 1,000 to turbo 400. After that, it's everything. So is it just clutches and bands then, and a shift kit for a turbo 400, and call it good? Power out of modified. All of this is NA stuff, but if you add, here's the thing. If one of them makes more power NA and you add boost to it, it's going to make more power under boost. Got to change a lot of parts, sprags, high number of clutches in the clutch packs. Is there room for more clutches in the packs? Different hardened gear sets. Do you still got to do a 300M shaft or something? '98 Grand Prix GTP. Supercharged, thinking of compound. Yeah, Rocky, take a look at the video. I have a video up on adding a turbo to the supercharged combination. It works pretty good. Why is the pole blank? There's no blank pole. It's up now. Take a look at the pole. The poll question is, who thinks the stock and modified LS3 makes more power than the stock and modified Coyote? So don't you think an 84 millimeter torque starter will be capable of 1,000 wheel horsepower? I don't know about the new one. I had only tested one of their superchargers. I haven't, if they have a new version that's bigger, maybe they have something that's capable of that now. So you can talk to them. They will know. Do you increase 5.3 compression on that test with the Coyote? Not on the stock one. The on the modified one, the head was milled 30 thousandths, which is not going to change it dramatically. I can't see the pole yet. I wonder why the pole isn't showing up. Well, it's not the last poll question. The poll question is up right now. For the last poll question, are we talking NA modified or power outer modified? NA modified, but it wouldn't matter if you have one motor that makes 500 and the other one makes 400, and you add boost to both of them, the one that makes 500 is still going to make more power. Can confirm my poll is glitched. I wonder what's going on. I wonder if it didn't like having a second poll. Hot mess. I've taken the I don't know about 300,000 miles. We've taken stuff that's 260 or 270. And on the LS, you can still see the crosshatch. There's no ridge at the top, and the ring gap was still in the teens. So, and it's still the original. It's the factory piston and the factory rings. So there's the bore is not wearing at all, because otherwise there'd be ridge at the top, because the LS, the blocks don't wear. Coyote still revs further than an LS. Yeah, but the Coyote made peak power at the same RPM as the LS did. Coyote has a better block, crank, heads, cam. They will make 2,000 horsepower. The Admiral, the first poll was a glitch too. I wonder what's going on. Glitchy. That's okay. We only have 3 minutes left. LS is cheaper. I can tell you, I'm still getting lots of rabid people on both sides. Not so much the Coyote guys. They're probably pretty happy about it. But this one will change them. I can tell you that in 2011, which is when I'm basing this video on, the factory rating for the Coyote was 412 horsepower and 390 foot-pounds of torque. The factory rating for the LS, at least in the Camaro, was 426 horsepower and 420 foot-pounds of torque. It's a little bit higher in the Corvette, 430 or 435 or something in the Corvette, with the fancy exhaust that they had on there. So the LS3 is rated higher, a little higher in terms of horsepower, and 30 foot-pounds of torque more. Should Big Bang a Coyote with rods and pistons? I don't. None of the Big Bang motors have rods and pistons in them. They just are stock. Admiral, I agree. I do need to do a modular forward. The two valve is the first one that I want to do. I've watched many four valve and two valve tests, and the four valve makes more power. A four valve head is hard to beat, which is why after they did the modular stuff in Engine Masters, they're like, yeah, you can't bring those anymore. Coyote cams are bigger spec wise. I think that the cams are probably a little more aggressive on the Coyote because the displacement is down, and so they're making up for it. But they also have variable cam timing, which helps them run more camshaft and then tame it down, for idle and drivability and stuff, which is cool. Which is a better way to go than making very, very mild cams and then making them think that they're bigger by by going the other direction with variable cam. Richard, you should also test a 463 valve later, supposedly much stronger than the two valves in the bottom end. Is that block better on a three valve? What's different about the three valve? The thing that I would have to say on this particular one, and then I've got to get going. So, in fact, we're going to close our poll. It's oddly enough, it's in the 53-47. So 53 saying yes. Maybe some guys can't really see the poll. The one thing I can say, and there's something to think about, is that the 6.2, the LS3, has an aluminum block. We don't normally take that particular block over about 1,000 horsepower. I know guys have, but most of the guys running lots and lots of power with LS motors and stock blocks are doing it with an iron block, or they're doing it with the aluminum 5.3 block and not the LS3 block. Coyote guys are making lots of power with their stock blocks, although not as much as the stock previous generation modular Fords like Mahovitz has, which is why they, people started making billet blocks. Three valve NEMAC block is about as strong as a Texid block. I don't know, Admiral. I think on the two valve, we're going to get to breaking a rod or a piston before we get to a block strength problem. That's my thinking on the two valve, but hold the collection for a mod motor Big Bang. I may ask for that, but not right now. Put an LS4 intake on an LS3 with an adapter plate. Since you want to kill all the power on it. You won't ever break a mod motor block at a Big Bang? I don't think so. And we wouldn't do that on the LS either. They're not, the block isn't the thing. If you have a and I don't think the crank is either. I don't even think a cast crank is a problem. And I think we'll see that even with the 462 valve that, we always put the Coyote cranks in there, but I don't think that that's a problem. I think we're going to hurt usually a cast piston, or those are probably powdered metal rods too. Any GM LSJ LNF content plan? I haven't even ever even looked at those, so probably not. Ryan, those are just different names for the same thing. The intake manifold adapter test you did was one of the more surprising findings on the channel. Why that it didn't work? The air doesn't like that. It works well for boost, and because of the entry angle on the boosted short runner or no runner intake manifolds, it tends to work a little better, but not for NA stuff. 7.3 Ford mod motor to compete with a 6.2. Yeah, and I wanted it to work. I wanted the adapter to work. I wanted the LS3 intake manifold with an adapter on a cathedral port to be the fast intake, but on the cheap. But it was, alas, it was not. It was not to be. And on that note, it is time to go. I got to go finish editing this LS3 versus Coyotes. So you know, there's nothing better than making everybody mad again. I'll see you guys all tomorrow. Bam, bam, bam.